In this video I'm going to show you how to baste two fabrics together left-handed, because I see so many right-handed tutorials but I hardly ever see a left-handed one, and since I'm left-handed I can show you that. On my fabric I have marked my sewing line, but first I am going to pin those two together, and I do that by pinning on top, checking at the back, following the straight line and coming back up. This way I'm always sure that my sewing lines are exactly in the right place. Close enough. Alright, like this. Basting is used to temporarily sew two fabrics together. This way you don't have pins in the way with fittings or with hand sewing. You can use different colors for different fittings. But in this case I'm going to use the blue thread and quite a large needle so you can see what I'm doing. I have pinned directly onto my sewing line, but I'm going to baste a little bit more into the seam allowance. And I'm not going to knot my thread, I'm just going to make two stitches or one stitch on top of one another, and that locks the thread in place. As you can see, I can pull it quite hard, nothing happens. Basting thread has short fibers, so you can remove them if you have sewn over them. But since I always baste inside the seam allowance, I don't run into that problem. Remove your pin. Make stitches from half a centimeter up to a centimeter. And then you, for straight lines, that's enough. If you have to use if you have to go around a corner, you can use smaller stitches, like half a centimeter, and then you can do more in one go. But since this is a simple straight line, we're just going to use larger stitches. And the reason that I baste in the seam allowance is that I don't mark the fabric. If you have a very fine silk, you might mark the fabric if you do that. And this way, there you don't have that problem. And as you can see, left-handed is not that different from right-handed. To lock my thread, I just make a stitch on top of the other one, and then it's locked again, and I can cut it off. And there we have the basted line. We are now going to sew these two pieces together, and we are going to use a different thread for that. It's thinner, so I can also use a thinner needle. I did not take the smallest one, so I can see what I'm doing. I am going to knot the thread this time. So there's a small knot at the end. And I'm going to use almost the same stitch, which is called a running stitch. And as you can see, I make several after each other, just by going up and down with the needle and gently going through the fabric. And this is just a basic running stitch. You can use this for side seams in skirts, seams that do not have to have a lot of stress on them, because as you can see, you can pull it apart a little bit. To help with hand sewing, it's sometimes easy to use a tailor's hem. This is a small one, quite a firm one. And if you have made a couple of stitches, you can pin it onto the sewing hem. Please do it in the same line as where you're stitching, because otherwise you will pull the fabric in the wrong way. And now I'm going to do a stitch that's a little bit tougher for seams that have to be able to withstand more stress. And it's called a running back stitch. So you make a couple of small stitches and then you take one stitch back. And then you take 2 or 3 stitches again. And 1 stitch back. You can do this with 2, 3, 4 running stitches and 1 back stitch. It's just a rhythm and the stress it needs to be able to withstand. But it's quite fast, as you can see, even if you do a back stitch every other stitch. And as you can see, I can pull the fabric tight. And this one is a little less visible and can withstand more stress. Another type of the running and the back stitch is the half back stitch. This means you go in with a needle, make quite a large stitch, say 4 millimeters. You pull through and then you get back 2 millimeters, go forward quite a large part again, and this way you get a very firm sewing stitch. And this is called half a back stitch. Goes quite fast, as you can see, and can withstand quite a lot of stress. The last one in this line is the normal back stitch, and I am going to pull my fabric back a little bit, pin it down, and then I can show you the normal back stitch. The half back stitch doesn't touch. The normal back stitch does, so you don't go as far forward and you put the needle back in the hole where the other one came out, and this way you can sew and hold your line. Keep your work tight, just put some pressure on it, and also make sure your thread is pulled nicely into the fabric. So this is the back stitch done left-handed. And with a little bit of practice you can go quite fast, as you can see. You can make the stitches a little bit larger by making them quite small. So just a little bit larger. Again, I'm not using a thimble at the moment because this is just practice, and I don't have to do a whole yard of stitching. So these are a bit larger stitches, these are the smaller stitches, but as you can see, I'm pulling quite hard and it can withstand a lot of pressure. And that's the back stitch done left-handed. And if you've sewn all the way to the end and you want to tie off your thread, you can just make a couple of stitches on top of each other. Pull it tight, and then you have locked your thread in place and you can cut it off, and then you have the running stitch, the half back stitch and the back stitch, and this is what they look like on the other side. And these are the stitches that you can use to sew panels together. Hemming is another thing, and I'm going to do another video about that. Also left-handed.